What is it like to be born at the top of the mountain? To arrive in a world where your family name is already a legend, your future already a subject of national speculation? Some dynasties are built on wealth, others on power, but the Kennedys, they built a dynasty of myth. And what is it like to be the first child of the next generation, the one who is handed the torch, when you're barely old enough to understand what it means? Today we're telling the story of a woman born to be a queen in America's unofficial royal family. She was the first grandchild of a political patriarch, the niece of a beloved president, and the eldest child of a man who seemed destined to reclaim the throne. She was supposed to be the one who would carry the Camelot legacy into a new century, but her life was shaped not by the triumph she was born for, but by the tragedies she was forced to endure. This is the story of Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, the Kennedy who was first in line, and the heavy, heartbreaking burden that came with it. To understand Kathleen Kennedy, you have to picture America in the early 1950s and 60s. It was an age of soaring confidence and simmering anxiety. The nation was booming, the suburbs were sprawling, and the American dream seemed within reach for millions. At the heart of this optimistic era was a new kind of political glamour, a youthful energy that coalesced around one family, the Kennedys. When her uncle John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960, Washington was transformed into Camelot. It was a time of sparkling state dinners, high culture, and a sense that America was on the cusp of a golden age. The Kennedys were more than just a political family. They were celebrities, icons of style, intelligence, and vigor. At the center of this world, just a stone's throw from the White House, was Hickory Hill, the bustling Virginia estate of the president's younger brother and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Hickory Hill was not a quiet, orderly home. It was the chaotic, loving, and fiercely competitive nerve center of the Kennedy dynasty's next generation. It was a whirlwind of touch football games on the lawn, dogs and ponies wandering through the house, and a constant stream of the most powerful and interesting people in the world coming through the front door. To be a child in this environment was to grow up with the belief that you were at the center of the universe and that you had a profound, almost sacred duty to change the world for the better. This was the vibrant, hopeful, and impossibly privileged world that Kathleen Kennedy was born into. But it was also a world living on a knife's edge, a world where the bright light of Camelot would soon cast the darkest of shadows. Kathleen Hartington Kennedy was born on the 4th of July, 1951. She was the first of what would eventually be 11 children of Robert and Ethel Kennedy, and the very first grandchild of the formidable Kennedy clan patriarch, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. Her birthright was immense, but her name was a prophecy. She was named after her aunt Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy, a vivacious and rebellious figure who had been killed in a plane crash just 3 years earlier. From her first day, she was linked to the family's tragic glamour. Growing up as the eldest child at Hickory Hill was a unique challenge. In a family that prized toughness, competition, and intellectual sparring, being the first and for a time the only girl meant she had to be tougher than anyone. She was the responsible one, the serious one, the little girl who learned to ride horses, sail boats, and hold her own in the rough and tumble world of her boisterous younger brothers. Her childhood was a blur of incredible experiences. She met world leaders, played with the children of astronauts, and had the President of the United States as her doting Uncle Jack. But this idyllic world was shattered on November 22nd, 1963. Kathleen was 12 years old when her uncle was assassinated in Dallas. The fairy tale of Camelot died that day, and the family and the nation were plunged into a period of profound grief. For the next 5 years, her father, Robert, stepped into the void. He became the keeper of his brother's legacy, a senator from New York, and a powerful voice for the poor and marginalized. In 1968, he decided to run for president himself, and it seemed for a brief, hopeful moment that the Kennedy dream might be reborn. Kathleen, now a bright and politically aware teenager of 16, was deeply involved in her father's campaign. Then came the night of June 5th, 1968. Robert Kennedy had just won the crucial California primary. Kathleen was at a boarding school thousands of miles away. A classmate woke her in the middle of the night to tell her that her father had been shot. The next few hours were a chaotic blur of confusion and dread. The next day, he was gone. For Kathleen Kennedy, this was the moment her life truly began, and the moment her childhood definitively ended. In the devastating aftermath of her father's assassination, this 16-year-old girl was forced to become, in her own words, a surrogate adult. While her mother was consumed by an almost catatonic grief, Kathleen took on an unimaginable burden. She was the one who met her father's coffin when it arrived at the airport. She was the one who had to help shepherd her 10 younger siblings through the bewildering trauma of the funeral. It was a responsibility that would shape the rest of her life. After her father's death, she followed the path of public service he had laid out. She graduated from Harvard, worked with Native American communities in New Mexico, and earned a law degree. She married her college sweetheart, David Townsend, and started a family of her own. But the call to continue her father's political work was always there. She moved to Maryland, worked as a prosecutor, and in 1994, she made her move. She ran for lieutenant governor of Maryland and won, becoming the first Kennedy of her generation to hold a major elected office. The torch had been passed. The Kennedy dynasty, it seemed, was back. The weight of the Kennedy legacy is something few people can truly comprehend. For Kathleen, it was the air she breathed, a constant presence that shaped every aspect of her life, especially in the wake of her father's death. The personal toll of that tragedy was immense and lifelong. She later recalled the moment she saw her father's casket, a moment of chilling clarity for a 16-year-old girl. "I saw the coffin," she said, "and I knew that my role was to take care of my mother and my brothers and sisters." Childhood was over. This sense of duty became her armor and her guide. While some of her cousins and even some of her own siblings would later struggle publicly with the darker side of the Kennedy legacy, the pressure, the scandals, the addiction, Kathleen became the family's rock. She was the sensible Kennedy, the responsible one. Her deep Catholic faith, inherited from her mother Ethel, became a profound source of strength, a moral compass in a world that had lost its bearings. She found solace not in the fast-paced, glamorous life that was available to her, but in service, study, and family. Her 8 years as Lieutenant Governor of Maryland were, in many ways, the fulfillment of this duty. But this was not a symbolic role, a placeholder for a famous name. She dove into the mechanics of governing with a seriousness that surprised many. She was known as a hard-working, policy-focused, and effective public servant. She didn't just lend her name to initiatives, she built them from the ground up. Take, for instance, her work on crime. At a time when the national conversation was dominated by broad, tough-on-crime rhetoric, Kathleen was pioneering a more nuanced, data-driven approach. She championed a program called Hotspot Communities, which focused law enforcement resources and social services on small, specific neighborhoods where crime was most concentrated. It was a practical, intelligent strategy that got real results, reducing crime rates in targeted areas significantly. This was the work she loved, the unglamorous, detailed business of making government work better for people. She championed initiatives in education, crime prevention, and community service, programs directly inspired by her father's belief that government could be a force for good. She was building a solid, respectable political career brick by brick, earning her place through merit, not just by her name. But behind the public servant was the private woman, and her relationship with her mother Ethel was the bedrock of her life. They had weathered the ultimate storm together. Ethel, a woman of ferocious spirit and unwavering faith, had instilled in her children a sense of resilience that was almost superhuman. But Kathleen, as the eldest, shared a unique and heavy burden with her mother. She was not just a daughter, she was a partner in the monumental task of keeping a shattered family together. Imagine the scene at Hickory Hill in the months after June 1968. While the world saw Ethel's stoic public appearances, Kathleen saw the private reality, a mother enveloped in a grief so profound it threatened to swallow the entire household. In the chaotic, grief-stricken aftermath, Ethel and Kathleen became the twin pillars holding up the roof of that famous home. While Ethel provided the spiritual and emotional core, battling her own despair to remain a beacon of faith for her children, Kathleen provided the practical day-to-day structure for her younger siblings. She became the gatekeeper of her mother's sorrow, quietly managing the endless stream of visitors and phone calls so Ethel could have space to mourn. It was a silent pact, an unspoken understanding between a mother and her eldest child that they would not let the family dissolve into sorrow. She was the one who made sure homework was done, that schedules were kept, that there was some semblance of normalcy in a life that was anything but. To her 10 younger brothers and sisters, she was no longer just a sibling. She was her mother's trusted lieutenant in the fight for their family's survival. This sense of responsibility also came with a profound sense of loneliness. While her friends were going to proms and worrying about dates, Kathleen was helping to raise 10 children. It created a maturity and a seriousness in her that set her apart from her peers. She was in the world, but not entirely of it. While America was experiencing the cultural earthquakes of the late 60s and early 70s, Woodstock, protests, a revolution in music and society, Kathleen was living in a time capsule of duty. This wasn't a teenage rebellion. It was an early and abrupt entry into the world of adult burdens. The armor she had to build around herself during those years was essential for survival, but it would have lasting consequences. It protected her, but it also separated her, shaping a public persona that could sometimes feel reserved or distant. The famous images of Kennedys are of touch football games and boisterous family gatherings. But for Kathleen, the reality was often the quiet, isolating weight of duty. Her joy came not from the social scene, but from quiet accomplishments, from starting her own family, and from the belief that she was honoring her father's memory by living a life of purpose. It was this deep, almost solemn sense of purpose that made her political success seem so inevitable, and it also made her eventual stunning political failure all the more shocking. For all the doors the Kennedy name opened, it also created a set of almost impossible expectations, and this became the central controversy of Kathleen Kennedy Townsend's political career. Was she a talented public servant in her own right? Or was she simply the beneficiary of a legendary name, a princess awaiting her coronation? This wasn't just a question for pundits. It was the tightrope she had to walk every single day. She wasn't just being compared to her political opponents, she was being compared to ghosts. She was expected to have the effortless charisma of her uncle, Jack, and the fiery moral conviction of her father, Bobby. It was a standard no living person could possibly meet. This debate reached its fever pitch during her run for governor of Maryland in 2002. The media narrative was set before the campaign even truly began. This wasn't just an election, it was a restoration. It was the next chapter in the Kennedy saga. The sense of destiny was palpable, and for a time it seemed like the state of Maryland and the entire country was swept up in it. But this very narrative, the story of the princess coming to claim her crown, began to chafe against the democratic sensibilities of the voters. They wanted to elect a governor, not anoint an heir. And as the campaign wore on, the weight of those impossible expectations and the ghost of her family's past would prove to be a burden too heavy to bear. On paper, she should have been a shoo-in. She was a popular two-term lieutenant governor in a heavily Democratic state. She was a Kennedy, with all the fundraising power and media attention that name commanded. The national press treated her candidacy not as a state-level race, but as the next chapter in the great American political saga. Reporters from New York, Washington, and even London descended on Maryland. This was supposed to be the moment the torch was truly passed, the moment that would launch the next Kennedy toward the national stage, perhaps even the White House. The pressure was immense, a suffocating blanket of historical expectation. But the Kennedy mystique proved to be a double-edged sword. While it brought her name recognition, it also brought an intense level of scrutiny. Every policy position was analyzed through the lens of her family's history. Every campaign stumble was magnified and treated like a national incident. Some voters, even some Democrats, began to feel there was a sense of entitlement, a feeling that she was running on her name rather than her record. This was the Kennedy tax, the backlash that can occur when a famous name begins to feel more like an inheritance than a qualification. It didn't help that her political style, born from that serious and purposeful youth, could come across as reserved, even aloof. The armor she had built to survive her childhood sometimes prevented voters from seeing the passionate public servant underneath. Her campaign made a series of critical and ultimately fatal missteps. The most damaging was her choice of a running mate, Admiral Charles R. Larson, a respected military man, but a political novice who had been a registered Republican for most of his life. The thinking was likely to appeal to moderate and independent voters in a post-9/11 world focused on security. But the move backfired spectacularly. It alienated the Democratic base, the party's most loyal activists and labor unions, who saw it as a betrayal of liberal principles. They felt she was taking their support for granted. Her opponent, the moderate Republican Robert Ehrlich, a charismatic and skilled retail politician, brilliantly exploited this opening. He successfully painted her as a classic tax and spend liberal, out of touch with the concerns of mainstream Maryland voters, while he positioned himself as the common-sense alternative. The result of the election was a stunning upset. The polls had tightened, but few believed she could actually lose. On election night, as the returns came in, a shocked silence fell over her campaign headquarters. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend lost, and she lost decisively. The dream of a new Kennedy era, of a restoration of Camelot, died on a Tuesday night in Maryland. The historical debate over her loss continues. Was she simply a flawed candidate who ran a poor campaign? Was she a victim of a national political shift to the right? Or was the Kennedy name, in the 21st century, finally more of a liability than an asset? The truth is likely a combination of all three. Her defeat was a deeply personal public failure, and it marked the end of her career in electoral politics. It was a brutal lesson that in modern America, a legendary name is no longer enough. The 2002 election could have been the final tragic chapter in Kathleen Kennedy Townsend's public life. Instead, her defeat marked the beginning of a new and perhaps more authentic chapter of service. Her significance lies not just in her political career, but in her resilience and in the way she has redefined the Kennedy legacy for her generation. She was, without question, a trailblazer. In a family where the men were groomed for political power and the women were often expected to be supportive wives and mothers, Kathleen broke the mold. She proved that a Kennedy woman could be a serious, substantive political leader in her own right. Her 8 years as lieutenant governor were not symbolic. She was a hands-on, policy-driven leader who left a tangible mark on the state of Maryland. She paved the way for other women in her family, and in politics in general, to seek and win high office. Her career also serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the weight of political dynasties. Her loss in 2002 was a signal that the American public had grown wary of inherited political power. It demonstrated that while a famous name can get you in the door, you still have to prove yourself, and you may even have to work harder to overcome the perception of entitlement. Her story marks a turning point in the public's relationship with the Kennedy brand, a shift from automatic reverence to a more critical and demanding appraisal. But perhaps her most enduring significance is what she has done since leaving the political arena. Instead of fading away or becoming a bitter commentator, she has dedicated her life to the very ideals her father championed, but through different means. She has taught at Harvard and Georgetown, written books on the role of faith in public life, and worked with nonprofits focused on retirement security and community service. She has found a way to continue her public service outside the brutal, unforgiving world of electoral politics. In doing so, she has offered a new model for her family and for the country, that a commitment to the public good does not have to be measured by election results. Her life's work continues her father's mission, just not from the office he once held. Kathleen's journey is a poignant reminder that we are not defined by the roles we are born into or even by our most public failures. We are defined by how we carry our burdens and by the purpose we find in the aftermath of our deepest sorrows. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, the first child of the next generation, found her own way to keep the flame alive, not as a blazing torch for the world to follow, but as a steady, quiet light of her own.